She blinked, surprised by the question. After a long pause, she finally answered, Rhea. Daniel nodded. Rhea, ha. Well, Rhea, you're not dead yet, and as long as you're breathing, you still have a choice. Her gaze flickered toward him, something unreadable in her expression. A choice for what? To live, he said simply. To fight another day. Maybe not with a blade or a gun, but there's more to war than just dying on a battlefield. She didn't answer, but for the first time, she didn't argue either. Daniel leaned his head back against the cold metal wall, listening to the faint hum of enemy drones circling above. The war was still far from over. But in this moment, in this quiet space between battles, something had shifted. She wasn't ready to admit it yet. Maybe she never would. But he could see it. The warrior inside her wasn't gone, just wounded. The air inside the bunker was heavy with silence. Outside, the distant sounds of battle still echoed through the ruined city. Explosions rumbling like distant thunder, the sharp crack of gunfire cutting through the night. But down here, in this dark shelter, it felt like another world. A world where the war had paused, if only for a moment. Daniel sat against the cold metal wall, watching Rhea carefully. Her golden eyes, once filled with defeat, were different now. There was still pain, still doubt, but something had shifted. She was listening, thinking, fighting against the part of herself that had already accepted death. She hated being weak. He could see it in the way her hands clenched, in the frustration that flickered across her face every time. She tried to move her legs and failed, but she wasn't giving up. Not anymore. Rhea took a slow breath. How long? Daniel raised an eyebrow. How long what? She hesitated. How long until I can fight again? He exhaled, setting his rifle aside. Honestly, I don't know. Your spine took a bad hit. If we can find proper medical treatment, maybe. But out here. He shook his head. It's a miracle you're even awake. She frowned. Then I need to get stronger another way. Daniel smirked. That's the spirit. She glared at him. Don't mock me. I'm not, he replied, leaning forward. You want to fight? Then start by moving your fingers. Her gaze flickered down to her hands. Slowly, she flexed them, her sharp claws barely twitching. It wasn't much, but it was something. He nodded. Good, keep doing that. The more you push, the more control you'll get back. She scoffed. I am not a fragile human. My body is stronger. Daniel shrugged. Doesn't look like it right now. Her eyes flashed, a hint of the warrior inside her resurfacing. Give me a blade, and I will still defeat you. He grinned. You can't even sit up. Her jaw clenched, but instead of arguing, she focused. She planted her hands on the floor and gritted her teeth, trying to push herself up. Her arms trembled, but she didn't stop. Daniel saw the strain in her face, the sheer force of will she was putting into the effort. She lifted herself an inch, then collapsed back against the wall, breathing heavily. Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He just nodded. That's a start. She turned her face away, frustration clear. It is pathetic. It's progress, he corrected. Strength isn't just about swinging a sword or tearing through enemies. It's about surviving, adapting. She didn't respond, but he could tell she was listening. A sudden sound made them both freeze, a distant mechanical whirring. Drones. Enemy patrols. Daniel grabbed his rifle and moved toward the entrance, peering out carefully. Red lights flickered in the dark streets above. They're searching, he muttered, probably looking for survivors. Rhea watched him closely. Can you fight them? He glanced back at her. I can take a few down, but if they send reinforcements, we're screwed. She frowned. Then what do we do? Daniel hesitated. He had been thinking about that ever since he found her. He could leave, try to sneak through the ruins, find his way back to human lines. It would be risky, but not impossible. But if he left her here, she wouldn't last long. He looked at her again. at the warrior who refused to die quietly. He nodded. Too close. She studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she let out a quiet, breathy laugh. It was weak, almost bitter, but it was there. "You're insane," she muttered. Daniel smirked. "I've been told that too." For the first time, she didn't argue. Silence settled between them, heavy and unspoken. The bunker walls were cold, the air thick with dust, and the metallic scent of old blood. Daniel adjusted his position, keeping his rifle close as he glanced at the Valeri beside him. She lay against the wall, her breathing uneven, her golden eyes distant. She was barely holding on. He had seen wounded soldiers before, humans, broken and beaten, struggling to stay alive. But this was different. Valeri warriors were known for their pride, their strength. Yet here she was, motionless, paralyzed, trapped in her own body. It was a cruel fate for a warrior. Daniel reached into his supply pouch and pulled out a small medical injector. "This will help with the pain," he muttered. She didn't react, just stared blankly ahead. "You still with me?" he asked, frowning. Her lips barely moved. Why bother? Daniel hesitated. He had expected anger, maybe even defiance. But this was something else. A hollow emptiness. She had already given up. He pressed the injector against her neck and activated it. A small hiss sounded as the medicine entered her system. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't flinch. "You're not dead yet," Daniel said firmly. "So don't act like it." Her eyes slowly moved toward him, but there was no fire in them anymore, just exhaustion. "You don't understand," she whispered. "A Valeri warrior who cannot fight is nothing." Daniel exhaled sharply, leaning back against the wall. "That's a load of crap." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "It's the truth." "Maybe to your people," Daniel shot back. "But your people left you behind, didn't they?" A flicker of something crossed her face. Pain, resentment. She didn't answer. Daniel continued. "You fight, you bleed, you nearly die for them, and they abandon you the second you can't stand on your own 2 feet. That's not strength. That's weakness." Her jaw tightened. "You know nothing about us." "I know enough." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of distant explosions in the ruined city above them. The war was still raging somewhere out there, but down here, in this broken shelter, it felt like they were the only two left in the world. She closed her eyes for a brief second, her expression unreadable. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I was supposed to die with honor. Not like this." Daniel studied her, trying to understand. He knew what she meant. Warriors didn't fear death. They feared being useless, forgotten. He had seen it in human soldiers too, those who had lost their limbs, their ability to fight. Some of them never recovered from that. But he wasn't about to let her sink into that kind of despair. "Honor doesn't mean much if you're dead," he said finally. She opened her eyes, golden irises reflecting the dim light. "To us, it does." Daniel ran a hand over his face, frustration creeping in. "All right. Let's say you're right. Let's say the only thing that mattered was dying on the battlefield. What now?" She didn't respond. "You're still breathing," he pressed. "So are you just gonna lie here and wait to die?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, she spoke. "I don't know." It was the most honest answer she had given him yet. Daniel sighed and shifted closer, pulling out a small ration bar from his pack. He unwrapped it and held it out to her. She eyed it warily. "Is that poison?" He snorted. "Yeah, sure. I saved your life just to kill you with a bad energy bar." She hesitated, then slowly reached out. Her fingers barely moved, her strength failing her. Daniel saw the frustration flash across her face, but she swallowed it down. She wasn't used to being weak. Without a word, he broke the ration bar into smaller pieces and placed one near her lips. She tensed, but eventually, she took it. The moment was strange, an enemy feeding another enemy. Just hours ago, they had been on opposite sides of a war. Now she was relying on him to survive. As she chewed slowly, he studied her. There was something different about her compared to the other Veleri he had encountered. The others fought with ruthless efficiency, cold and calculated. But she had fire, even now. Even with her body broken, something in her refused to be fully extinguished. "What's your name?" he asked. The quantum displays showed the true extent of Earth's defenses, invisible to Imperial sensors but deadly real. Weapon platforms hidden in dimensional pockets throughout the solar system. Antimatter production facilities buried in Mercury's crust. A fleet of advanced warships concealed within the asteroid belt, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Their sensors are still focused on our decoy installations, Mayray reported with a slight smile. They're completely convinced by our fake military bases and obsolete weapons. The general touched a control, bringing up a new display showing the status of Earth's quantum defense grid. Thousands of satellites that appeared primitive to alien scans were actually advanced weapon platforms, each capable of unleashing destruction beyond Imperial understanding. "Signal from Titan Base," an operator called out. "The quantum gate network is primed. We can deploy reinforcements from Saturn's moons in under 5 seconds if needed." Do-hyun walked slowly around the central hologram, studying the enemy fleet from all angles. The aliens had arranged their ships in perfect attack formation, supremely confident in their technological superiority. They had no idea they were flying into the most sophisticated trap ever constructed. "Fascinating, isn't it?" he mused. "They think they're dealing with a species that just reached its moon. They have no concept of what humanity has become." The room grew quieter as the Imperial fleet passed the lunar orbit. On Earth's surface, the charade continued. Radio stations broadcast their normal programs. Television signals bounced between outdated satellites, and internet traffic flowed through seemingly primitive fiber optic cables. "All defense grid units report ready," Mayray said, her voice steady. "Quantum targeting solutions are locked. On your command, we can end this in seconds." Do-hyun looked at each council member in turn. These weren't just military officers. They were the guardians of humanity's greatest secret. For generations, they had maintained the illusion of a divided, primitive Earth while preparing for this very day. "It's time," he said simply. "Today, humanity shows its true face to the galaxy. Initialize final defense protocols." The war room hummed with activity as centuries of preparation came to fruition. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. And in moments, the Imperial fleet would learn why it's dangerous to underestimate humans. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, Lieutenant Yumho stared at his sensor displays with growing confusion. The readings made no sense. One moment showing the expected primitive Earth technology, the next flickering with energy signatures that shouldn't exist in this sector of space. "Something's wrong," he muttered, running another diagnostic on his equipment. The sensor arrays were functioning perfectly, yet the readings kept shifting, as if reality itself was becoming unstable around the fleet. Commander Sungmin noticed his lieutenant's concern from his command chair. "Report, Lieutenant. What are you seeing?" "Sir, Young Ho's voice trailed off as new data flooded his screens. "These energy readings, they're impossible. They're showing power levels that exceed our entire fleet's output by several orders of magnitude." Captain Haynewell moved to the sensor station, her previous confidence replaced by growing concern. "That can't be right. Run another scan." "I've already run 3, Young Ho replied, his fingers dancing across the controls. "The readings are getting stronger. It's as if something is emerging from subspace all around us." The massive view screen at the front of the bridge suddenly flickered, showing distortions in the space surrounding the fleet. Commander Sungmin rose from his chair, his sharp teeth no longer visible in his now grim expression. "Full stop," he ordered. "All ships hold position. Launch probe drones for closer analysis." Before the order could be carried out, space itself seemed to ripple like water. The distortions grew stronger, forming geometric patterns that surrounded the Imperial fleet in a perfect three-dimensional grid. "By the void," Haynul whispered, her professional demeanor cracking as she watched thousands of advanced weapons platforms materialize from seemingly nowhere. Each platform was easily the size of a small cruiser, their designs unlike anything in the Imperial database. "Impossible," Sung Min breathed, watching as more platforms appeared. "Their technology. This can't be right. They're supposed to be primitive." Young Ho's sensor console was now screaming with alerts. "Sir, I'm detecting quantum signatures, dimensional phasing technology, energy weapons that operate on principles I've never seen before. These platforms, they're far more advanced than our own technology." The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the true extent of Earth's defenses revealed themselves. What they had dismissed as primitive satellites transformed, their outer shells dissolving to reveal sophisticated weapon systems. The moon itself seemed to shift as hidden bases emerged from its surface. "Sir," Haynul reported, her voice shaking slightly, "we're detecting similar transformations throughout the solar system. Mars, Venus, Mercury, they all have hidden installations. The asteroid belt, there's an entire fleet hiding in there." Commander Sung Min gripped the arms of his command chair, his mind racing. Everything they knew about Earth had been wrong. The primitive technology, the divided nations, the outdated weapons, it had all been an elaborate deception. "Send an emergency transmission to High Command," he ordered. "Tell them." "Communications are being blocked," Yumho interrupted. "Not jammed. They're using some kind of quantum interference. Our signals can't penetrate it." The weapons platforms continued to appear, their numbers growing into the thousands. Each one was perfectly positioned, creating an inescapable net around the Imperial fleet. The humans had planned this trap with devastating precision. "Sir," Haynul said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're being scanned. Their sensors, they're reading everything. Our weapons, our shields, our engine cores, nothing is hidden from them." Some men watched as more revelations appeared on the main view screen. Earth's cities were transforming, their seemingly primitive structures giving way to reveal advanced architecture that had been hidden beneath elaborate holograms. The planet's atmosphere itself seemed to shimmer as layers of defensive shields became visible. "All these years," he said quietly, "all our intelligence, our observations, they knew we were watching. They showed us exactly what they wanted us to see." Young Ho's console displayed new data that made his eyes widen. "Commander, these weapon platforms, they're powered by artificial quantum singularities. Each one has enough firepower to destroy a small moon. And there are thousands of them." The bridge fell silent as the full truth became clear. They hadn't found a primitive civilization ripe for conquest. They had walked into a trap set by a species far more advanced than their own. The supposed primitive Earth had been a carefully crafted illusion, maintained for centuries until the perfect moment to spring their trap. "Sir," Haynul said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. Text only." Commander Sung Min nodded, and the message appeared on the main screen. It was short, simple, and terrifying in its implications. "Welcome to Earth. You have 30 seconds to surrender." In Earth Defense Command's main chamber, silence fell as the 30-second countdown began. The massive quantum displays showed the Imperial fleet frozen in place, surrounded by thousands of Earth's unveiled weapon platforms. Every person in the room understood they were about to change the course of human history. Colonel Mirai's fingers hovered over the quantum interface, her movements precise and controlled. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare anyone for being part of humanity's first interstellar combat operation. "All weapons platforms report ready," she announced, her voice carrying across the hushed command center. "Quantum grid is fully synchronized. Target solutions computed for all enemy vessels." General Du-hyun stood at the central command station, his weathered face illuminated by the holographic displays. Around him, The quantum screens showed real-time feeds from every world leader in the unified Earth government. Presidents, prime ministers, and chancellors watched in silence from their secure bunkers. Final status report, Du-hyun commanded. The reports came in quickly, each operator's voice clear and professional. Luna Base confirms targeting lock. Mars Command standing by. Titan defense grid synchronized. Solar observation posts all report ready. Asteroid belt fleet in position. Daniel ignored her. There was no time for an argument. The ruins of the battlefield stretched in every direction, offering little cover. He needed to find a place to hide, regroup, and figure out his next move. The extraction point was still miles away, and carrying her there through enemy territory was almost suicide. His earpiece crackled again. Drones are repositioning. They'll breach your location in less than 2 minutes. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had to move faster. His eyes scanned the wreckage, searching for anything that could provide shelter. Then he saw it. A collapsed bunker, its entrance half buried under the remains of a destroyed transport. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. He adjusted his grip on the Veleri and pushed toward it. She was still glaring at him, golden eyes burning with anger. "You're an idiot," she muttered. "Yeah, I get that a lot," Daniel shot back. Reaching the bunker, he carefully maneuvered through the wreckage, shoving aside twisted metal and broken stone. The entrance was narrow, just big enough for him to squeeze through. Inside, the space was dark, damp, and smelled of rust and old blood. It wasn't safe, but it was hidden. He lowered her carefully onto the ground. She winced but didn't make a sound. Even wounded and helpless, she refused to show weakness. Daniel took a step back, catching his breath. His hands were covered in her blood. The damage to her armor was worse than he thought. The blast that had paralyzed her had also scorched deep into her back. If she didn't get medical attention soon, she wouldn't last. She exhaled sharply, her fingers twitching against the cold floor. "Why?" Daniel frowned. "Why what? Why are you helping me?" Her voice was sharp, suspicious. "Your kind hates mine. We are enemies." He sighed, running a hand through his dirt-covered hair. "I don't leave people to die." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not people. I'm Veleri." Daniel crouched beside her, his expression serious. "Yeah. Well, your people left you behind. Mine would have done the same to me. So maybe we're not so different." She didn't respond. For the first time, something in her gaze shifted. Doubt, confusion, maybe even a flicker of understanding. The silence didn't last long. A distant whirring sound echoed through the ruins. Daniel's heart clenched. The drones were close. Too close. He reached for his rifle, quickly switching the power settings. His weapon had limited ammo, and fighting off the drones would be nearly impossible in his current position. If they found them, they were dead. The Veleri seemed to sense the tension. "They're coming." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Her jaw tightened. "Leave me." He shook his head. "Not happening." "You don't even know who I am." Her voice was bitter. "You could be saving someone who slaughtered your kind." Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened. "Does it matter?" She didn't have an answer for that. The sound of metal scraping against metal sent a chill down his spine. The drones were scanning the wreckage, searching for heat signatures, tracking movement. Daniel turned off his rifle's power source, making himself as invisible as possible. He held his breath. A red light flickered just outside the entrance of the bunker. The drone was close. Too close. The Veleri tensed. Even without movement in her body, her muscles twitched with instinct, ready to fight. But there was nothing she could do. Daniel slowly, carefully reached for a small EMP grenade strapped to his belt. One wrong move, one noise, and they were dead. The drone's scanner beeped softly as it scanned the bunker entrance. Daniel's fingers tightened around the grenade's pin. The drone hesitated. A long, agonizing second passed, then another. And then, it moved on. Daniel exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay still until the sound of whirring engines faded into the distance. Only then did he dare to move, sagging against the cold metal wall. The Vel-Eri was watching him. That was close. The battlefield was nothing but ruins and death. Smoke curled into the sky, the scent of burnt metal and flesh thick in the air. Fires crackled among the wreckage, casting eerie shadows over the corpses of both human and alien soldiers. Captain Daniel Kane moved cautiously through the remains, his rifle raised, eyes scanning for movement. His mission was simple: search for survivors and gather intelligence before extraction. His boots crunched over shattered armor plates and broken weapons. The war between humans and the Vel-Eri had raged for years, and today's battle had been one of the bloodiest. The Vel-Eri, an advanced warrior species, had always considered themselves superior. Their soldiers were enhanced, their technology decades ahead of humanity's. But even they bled, even they died. Then he saw her, a figure slumped against a collapsed war machine, half buried in rubble. Her armor, once pristine, was scorched and cracked. Vel-Eri warriors were known for their imposing forms, tall, powerful, their deep violet skin a mark of their strength. But this one was barely moving. Her helmet was missing, revealing sharp features, blood trailing down from her temple. She was breathing, but only barely. Daniel took a cautious step closer, his grip tightening on his weapon. It was stupid to help a Vel-Eri. They had slaughtered thousands of humans. They saw his kind as nothing more than insects, and yet she had been left behind. No sign of her allies. No rescue teams. A weak growl escaped her lips as her golden eyes flickered open. She tried to move, but her body refused to obey. That's when Daniel realized her legs weren't responding. She was paralyzed. Her glare was sharp, full of defiance even in her helpless state. Human. She spat, her voice hoarse. "Come to finish me off." Daniel didn't answer. His mind raced. A Vel-Eri left to die. That was unheard of. Their kind never abandoned their own, especially not a warrior. Something had gone terribly wrong. A sudden beep in his earpiece made him freeze. Incoming hostiles, his AI assistant warned. Cloaked enemy drones detected. Daniel's blood turned cold. The battlefield wasn't as empty as he thought. Vel-Eri AI drones, designed for execution, were moving in to wipe out any survivors. If they found her, they'd eliminate her without hesitation. And if they found him, he wouldn't last long either. He should leave. Walk away. Let the drones finish the job. Instead, he cursed under his breath and reached for her. Her eyes widened in shock as he grabbed her arm and hoisted her over his shoulder. She was heavier than she looked, her armor adding to the weight. What are you doing?" she hissed, struggling weakly. "Saving your stubborn ass," Daniel muttered, moving fast. The drones were closing in. The air shimmered as one of them decloaked, its sleek, metallic body humming with deadly energy. It locked onto them, targeting systems engaging. Daniel didn't slow. He reached into his belt, grabbing a small round device. "Close your eyes," he ordered. She barely had time to react before he threw the cloaking grenade. A bright pulse of energy exploded around them. In an instant, they vanished from enemy sensors. The drones hesitated, recalibrating, but it was too late. Daniel was already sprinting toward the ruins, his heart pounding. Behind him, the drones searched, scanning the battlefield, but they found nothing. For now, they were safe, but not for long. Daniel pushed forward, his breath heavy as he carried the wounded Vel-Eri warrior through the ruins. The weight of her armor and body slowed him down, but he didn't stop. His boots crunched against the debris, his mind racing. The drones wouldn't stay confused for long. They would adapt, recalibrate, and come hunting again. The Vel-Eri in his arms struggled weakly. Her fingers twitched against his back, but her body refused to obey her commands. Paralyzed. She must have realized it too, because the growl in her throat wasn't just frustration. It was fear. "Put me down," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're wasting your time." The Valkyrie dove toward the lead warship, engines at full burn. If they could breach its core, take out the command node, they could delay the attack, maybe even give the resistance a chance. But before they could reach it, a brilliant blue light flashed across space. A shockwave rippled through the battlefield, sending Syndicate ships spinning. Something massive had arrived. Carter shielded his eyes. When he looked again, his breath caught. A fleet, but not Syndicate. Human. Warships bearing the sigil of the old Earth Republic burst from hyperspace, their cannons lighting up the void. They had come. The comms flared to life, a strong, commanding voice breaking through. "Valkyrie, this is Admiral Rains. You're not alone anymore." Hope surged through Carter's chest. The Syndicate turned their fire toward the new fleet, but the humans fought back with everything they had. Explosions erupted as Syndicate warships fell. Carter clenched his fists. "Diaz, get us back in the fight." The Valkyrie, battered but unbroken, joined the counterattack. They weaved through the chaos, firing their last torpedoes into enemy engines, dodging debris, fighting with everything they had. The battle raged on, fire and metal consuming the void. One by one, the Syndicate ships fell. The tide had turned. As the last enemy ship exploded, Carter slumped back, exhaustion washing over him. They had won. Barely. But they had won. Hale let out a breathless laugh. "We're alive." Diaz chuckled. For now. Carter looked out at the burning wreckage of the Syndicate fleet. The war wasn't over, but today, humanity had proved something. They would never stop fighting. The battlefield was silent now. The wreckage of Syndicate warships drifted like shattered bones across the void, their once mighty fleet reduced to smoldering ruins. The Valkyrie floated among them, barely holding together, her hull scorched and torn. But she was still there. They were still there. Carter sat in the pilot's seat, his hands gripping the controls, his breath slow and steady. The battle was over. Humanity had won, but the weight of everything they had lost pressed down on him. He turned his head slightly, glancing at Diaz and Hale. They were alive, bruised, exhausted, but alive. That was more than he had dared to hope for. The comms crackled, and a familiar voice broke through. "Admiral Rains. Valkyrie, this is the UER flagship Solstice. We're standing by for rescue and recovery. You did good out there." Carter exhaled, leaning his head back against the seat. Good. He wasn't sure if that word fit what they had done. They had fought. They had survived. But at what cost? He turned his gaze to the viewport, watching the resistance ships as they emerged from the surface of the planet below. The survivors. The people they had fought for. Some were damaged, limping through space, but they had made it. That was what mattered. Diaz let out a tired laugh. "I can't believe we're still breathing." Hale smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, well, let's try to keep it that way." The ship groaned as Carter adjusted the controls, steering toward the Solstice. The fight was over, but there was still work to do. The Syndicate was wounded, not destroyed. The war wasn't finished. As they approached the massive human flagship, Carter felt a strange weight settle in his chest. A part of him had never expected to see another human fleet, never expected to be part of something bigger than the Valkyrie and her crew. But here they were. Humanity had come together, just when it seemed like all hope was lost. They docked, the airlock hissing open as a squad of soldiers rushed forward to help them. Medics checked their wounds, offering water and rations. Carter waved them off. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about the ones who didn't make it. His mind flashed back to the faces of those they had lost. Reeves, who had held the engine room against impossible odds. Sinclair, who had covered their retreat even when he knew it meant death. The nameless resistance fighters who had put everything on the line, just for a chance to see another sunrise. Carter clenched his fists. They had won, but victory never came without a price. Admiral Raines stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You did more than anyone could have asked, Captain Carter." "We move," he said finally. She stared at him. "I cannot walk." "I'll carry you." Her expression darkened. "I do not need." "Yes, you do," he cut in. "You want to fight. Then you need to live first." For a moment, she was silent. Then, slowly, she nodded. Daniel slung his rifle across his back and knelt beside her. "This might hurt." She gave a dry laugh. "Everything hurts." Carefully, he lifted her, securing her against his back. She was heavier than she looked. Muscle, armor, dead weight from her useless legs. She tensed, but didn't protest. Daniel adjusted his grip and exhaled. "All right, let's get out of here." Outside, the city was a graveyard of shattered buildings and smoldering wreckage. He moved carefully, sticking to the shadows. Every step was slow, deliberate. Rhea was silent against his back, watching their surroundings. Her voice was low when she finally spoke. "I will not forget this." Daniel smirked. "Good. Then you'll owe me one." She huffed. "Do not push your luck." Despite everything, despite the danger surrounding them, Daniel couldn't help but grin. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken after all. The ruined city stretched before them, a maze of destruction and death. Smoke curled from collapsed buildings, the distant echoes of battle still rumbling through the shattered streets. Daniel moved cautiously, his rifle steady, his grip firm as he carried Rhea on his back. She had grown quieter, her golden eyes scanning every shadow, every corner where an enemy could lurk. They had almost made it to the outskirts when Rhea suddenly tensed. Her claws dug slightly into Daniel's shoulder, not in pain, but in warning. He froze, listening. Footsteps. More than one. He eased her down behind a broken piece of concrete, carefully lowering her to a stable position. She might not have been able to stand, but her senses were sharp. Daniel crouched low, pressing himself against the rubble, peeking around the edge. 4 figures moved through the ruins, armored, their weapons ready. Not drones, not machines. These were warriors. And not just any warriors. "They are my kind," Rhea whispered, her voice tight. Daniel's gut twisted. He had hoped they were human allies. But this was worse. These were Rhea's people, the ones who had left her behind, who had abandoned her when she was wounded. He glanced at her, but her face was unreadable. "They might help you," he said carefully. She gave a bitter laugh. "No, they are not here to help." Before he could ask what she meant, one of the alien warriors spoke, his voice carrying through the ruins. "Rhea." She stiffened, her claws curling into fists. "Come out," the warrior continued, stepping forward. "We know you are here. We tracked your signal." Daniel gritted his teeth. That meant they had known she was alive all along. They had just decided she wasn't worth saving. Another warrior spoke, his tone colder. "You should not be alive. You are a disgrace. A warrior who cannot stand is no warrior at all." Rhea exhaled slowly. "I knew it." Daniel could see the conflict in her eyes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was betrayal. Her own people had come, not to rescue her, but to erase her. She turned to him, her voice lower now. "They will not stop. Even if I surrender, they will kill me." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then we fight." Her eyes widened slightly. "You would fight them. For me." He loaded his rifle. "Damn right I would." A strange expression crossed her face, something like gratitude, something deeper, but there was no time for words. The warriors were moving closer. Daniel took the first shot. The blast echoed through the ruins, striking the nearest alien warrior in the chest. He stumbled but didn't fall. His armor was strong. The others reacted instantly, diving for cover. "They will flank us," Rhea warned. Daniel adjusted his position, keeping her behind him. "Let them try." The next few moments were chaos. Bullets and plasma fire streaked through the ruins. Daniel moved fast, using the terrain to his advantage, keeping them pinned. He wasn't just fighting for himself now. He was fighting for Rhea, for the warrior they had abandoned. One of the aliens tried to rush in from the side, but before Daniel could react, Rhea did. Despite her injuries, despite the pain, she grabbed a fallen weapon and fired. The shot was perfect, striking her enemy in the throat. He fell without a sound.